post-election. This is a topic of discussion the whole night. We are going to be here with experts who are going to put this perspective and, of course, try and find a way out of this thing that happens in every election cycle that has given the country a bad name. But let's take you back. As I mentioned earlier at 6 p.m., if you look back to the 60s, they're the same tactics that were employed by the colonial master. They were not new, except that it's now changed because the world has also changed. But electoral control and intolerance has always been in this country for a long time. The founding president, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, had also his own ways of exhibiting this and controlling the political class and the voters, and so is retired former, the late President Moi, also had his own tactics. But let's bring this to the present, and I'll take you first to 1991, because this is when it manifested. This was a multi-party election, the first multi-party election, as expected, moving from KANU now to multi-party, and 1992 was the first year that experienced the election violence, followed by 1997, the subsequent election. There was a lot of electoral unrest because people were just beginning to understand what democratic elections are about in Kenya. That was the first year, 1997. Remember, it went all the way to 2007. We'll be telling you, because subsequently through the years, there's been a lot of action to try and control this. That's how NCIC was born much later, but there were several reports that were also authored within all these years, and the latest being the Kriegler Commission report. But let me start from top. There was a report by the Kenya Human Rights Commission on election intolerance and violence and hate speech. Then there was the Human Rights Commission, Human Rights Watch, that also authored its own report on the same. Kiliku Parliamentary Committee, this one had to go to Parliament for them to find a way forward. There was a special committee that was set up specifically for that. It was called Kiliku Parliamentary Committee Report. Of course, most of you now remember the Kivumbi report that was also very dicey. It was never implemented. It was authored, I think, in 1999. It was published many years later. There was the Waki report of the post-election violence after 2007, 2008. And lastly, as I mentioned, there was the Kriegler Commission report that partially has been implemented over time, and politicians have been complaining about this and, of course, talking about it, and really curtailed a lot of their freedoms and a lot of their movement, and of course what they can say and how they can say it. So 2007, 2008 post-election violence, that's the period. It lasted 59 days. It was heated. There was about 1,300 that were killed. 600,000 were displaced. We'll be putting this in context and talking about all these numbers and what can be done to contain it going forward. We are going to 2022. Already there are hotspots that have been mapped. There are people who have been spoken about. We are going to talk all about that. But first, let me take you to Sophia Wanuna on the other side. Sophia.
Indeed, thank you very much, Ken, for painting for us a picture why it is very important that as we are having this conversation, we are putting into context what is at stake. That when you're talking about political intolerance, that largely this is the unwillingness of individuals to accept, or if you like, accommodate contrarian views. And so in a dynamic society such as this one, where there are different beliefs, whether it's religious, political, in terms of support or otherwise, and then you have people who are not willing to accommodate because people may not always read from the same script, then that has in the past degenerated to political and electoral violence. And Ken, they're showing us just some of those figures. And the worst, when Kenya sank to the abyss, was 2007, 1,300 people killed in that instance, and of course hundreds others, thousands in fact, were displaced, and property worth millions of shillings destroyed as well. And so when it begins in what appears to be not so heightened of a fashion, then degenerating and growing as to have implications as to what we witnessed in the past, then it is of concern. And witnessing and seeing some of those developments recently, as was captured earlier by that story by Murimi Mwangi, also just going to paint a picture of why this is an important conversation to have at this time, why as a society we must be more tolerant of each other. And so I spoke to the DPP DPP Haji, because largely we have not seen people held to account. You saw the people arraigned in court, the politicians, after their sentiments that were seen to be inciting, and yet still in terms of accountability and being held responsible for actions or utterances that are made by this political class and others, that has been wanting. And so he shared a number of issues around this subject, from whether NCIC should get prosecutorial powers. He talked about having so many laws in as far as canvassing these issues when they emerge, and also the challenges they face as prosecution in dealing with this, saying in terms of law we have plenty, but where is the problem? He explains in this interview that I caught up with him a little bit earlier. Nuruddin Haji. Here you go. Political intolerance, it's one of those huge conversations, especially that becomes a big area of concern around the electioneering period. Already in the last few weeks, actually just last week, we had an incident in Nyeri with the deputy president when he was going for a church service. You remember the kennel incident that left 2 people dead as well. And in the past, there have been many others. I wonder whether first, just off the bat for you, looking at how we deal with such cases, there is a missing linkage in ensuring that there's accountability, consequences for when there is intolerance.
I think one of the most, the missing link, the most disturbing issue, before we even talk about legislation and the law itself and the justice system, is of course the responsibility. Right. Politicians and those charged with mandates by the people must be people of integrity, people who are responsible. So most of these laws are pieces of paper, I can say, without having individuals who observe and respect them and honestly adhere to what is captured in the law. Right. In the absence of that, they're just mere paper. And people will at the end antagonize the individuals, antagonize the public, and that's why then you have incidences that we've had all through. If the politicians respected the law, or all individuals, including the public, respected the law and adhere to it, then we would not have any problem. We would not be talking about intolerance at all. Yeah. That is the problem. That is the gist, first of all. And that's where we need to start. Because the Constitution is a great document. We have laws that govern hate speech, that govern the electoral process, that govern political parties. But these are hardly followed. And individuals then are frustrated. And this is where then the government has to step in. And when it does, then there is misinterpretation that people are abusing the power. But if individuals who are respectable enough, respecting the law and respecting the public and being honest, then we would not have this problem.
Yeah. And yet, when then you're talking about, individuals who will not respect the law, and it's true, largely we have plenty of legislation. In fact, sometimes there are those who feel there's over legislation even on issues should not be legislated on. But then if that exists, where you as a stakeholder in the criminal justice system come in with prosecutions, is to ensure alongside the other players that then there is holding to account, that if as a people in passing certain laws through our representatives or directly in the Constitution have said this is how we want to function and operate, we then do not see consequences. These individuals, whether it's hate speech, whether it's election violence, there isn't a strong enough message out there to the peer DPP as to cause for people to think twice before they venture.
Sophia, then the question we should ask ourselves, should we become a totalitarian system whereby we enforce these laws and these regulations by force in due disregard of the law or of the people or the voice of the people or of democracy itself? And I don't think we need to get there. What we need to agree as Kenyans is that we are a democratic country, and that in democracies, integrity and honesty is important, is the key of ensuring that it actually functions. If you look at a country like the UK, they hardly have a written constitution, but they function.
Correct.
Because they have integrity, or they believe in the system, and they ensure that they make it function. It is the public, it is us Kenyans who can make it function. It's not going to be the DPP or the IG or His Excellency the President himself, but Kenyans. And as I told you, we have, stacks and stacks of legislation that I can comb through and charge people who break the law.
Why are we not charging people?
But we are. The problem is...
Do you have the stats?
Yeah, I mean, we can give you if you want the stats,
yeah.
But we've charged. One of the biggest problems we have is the time. You go to court. It takes 5 to 6 years because of quite a number of issues, including issues of integrity. I mean, it becomes, sometimes it becomes frustrating because the public doesn't understand, but those involved do, and still exploit the many loopholes that we have.
Yeah.
So, for example, I can take a case today, but I'll have dozens of applications that I have to deal with before I get to the actual case to prosecute this person.
Yeah.
So they are abusing the systems. It's not that these things don't exist in countries like democracies like the US or the UK. They have those options, but people don't exploit them as much as we do, to the detriment of the justice system.
And I suppose the worst part of it all is that when it comes especially, say, to hate speech, even the political violence, there are the benefactors, right? Those who stand to benefit, and so their supporters, and with a political system and landscape here in Kenya that's largely ethnic-driven, then it only then serves to undo those efforts. So I wonder whether at this point, seeing the recent incidents as DPP, you're concerned, looking at 2022. We've seen 2007, we've seen other cases in the past, even in recent by-elections. So are you concerned that, going by how we've operated as a people, that this coming election is one you are worried about?
Of course, I'm concerned. I'm concerned by the rhetorics that are out there. I think some people have learned ways of escaping the law itself. Of course, we also have a problem with some of the legislations. We are frustrated as prosecutors that we can't prosecute for example, for criminal defamation. This was repealed. The courts came out very clearly. For example, the cyber laws. We can't prosecute some of these things. The threshold is also very high when we have to prosecute, for example, hate crimes. Maybe NCIC is sometimes overwhelmed. They can't be everywhere in the country. We have remote areas where some of these activities are happening. So, for example, if we look at what is happening in Laikipia, there is incitement by politicians. But, you know, NCIC cannot be everywhere. And that's why then we go back to the issues of integrity, honesty, the issues of, you know, being patriotic, ensuring that you know what the law is and you respect it.
And yet we see ourselves going down a slippery slope, but we appears, as you're speaking, that we are helpless as a people, because on one hand, you mentioned NCIC, largely described as a toothless bulldog, because they'll talk about a wall of hate, shame, list of shame, but really that serves nothing to the extent of people saying they will not do that again. On the other hand, you have incidences like Laikipia, where again, arrests become like a PR exercise, that the real issues, as you talked about, incitement by the political class, are not addressed. So then are we saying as a people we are unable to deal with what we find to be political intolerance, which leads to violence, death, destruction of property?
So Sophia, how do you address it other than in a legal way?
Yeah.
And how do you then address it when these people still exploit the many rules that have been put there? And if you look at our legislations, they are probably even more progressive than some of those very matured democracies in terms of how they intend to solve the problem. But then it still comes down to: is this just a document for us to look at, or is this something that individuals will respect, understand? The judiciary, some of these laws are meant to be preventive in their approach, but you will see that despite the resources that you put in place, For example, I think His Excellency the President has invested a lot from his government into police, into reforming the police itself, into reforming, for example, the prosecution itself. But he cannot be everywhere himself. At the end of it, what matters? Again, I come back to the very point that I've pointed out over and over. It depends on us as Kenyans being able to respect the law and being able to. I'm trying to look for the right word, but it takes me back to issues of integrity, honesty, and patriotism.
Because, for instance, when you look at what we witnessed in 2007, the TJRC report, that has never been implemented. Do you think that is partly why the people feel that even when we have gone through a whole exercise to try and press that reset button, it hasn't quite worked, and so it's a helpless almost situation for the people?
You know, Sophia, if we delve into that,
it's a whole.
It's a whole. It just goes back to were the individuals who were tasked to do that, how honest were they? Did we really intend to implement it as it was supposed to be?
Yeah.
The problem is you'll appoint somebody, and that person, after a while, will retreat to his own cocoon of his ethnic groups or political inclination. And basically then you miss the point. What we've done as Kenya, we have concentrated in building institutions. We've built institutions upon institutions, one oversighting the other.
Yeah.
We will probably after 2022 come up with additional institutions because maybe of some problems that we will have faced. We will bring additional legislation. But we're just adding layers upon layers of let me call them institutional building that are ineffective. Instead of us, concentrating on nation building, on issues of patriotism, on issues of building integrity and honesty amongst everybody in Kenya, in essence. So, Sophia, if you ask me, I think we have the legislations.
NCIC perhaps empower prosecutorial aspect of that, your thoughts?
As in we give them prosecution powers?
Yes.
And what will that help in? Yet you have, I don't want to be defensive, but you have the DPP. And let me just try and explain how our system has been structured and built. We have a sieving process. You have investigators where you have the National Police Service, EACC, NCIC, IPOA, and then you have the prosecution that then sieves to see whether there is actually a case.
Right.
But it doesn't end there. We have to present the case to the judiciary, who finally decide whether there's a case. Yeah. So you see, you're building a foolproof system. Sometimes allowing that line to blur, then you might, next time you will say, then also allow them to be the judge and the jury, so to speak, although we don't have juries here in Kenya.
And where's the weakest link?
I think is the Kenyan public.
Yeah.
We as Kenyans, whether you're a politician, whether you're the public yourself, whether you're in the justice system, it's all of us.
Part of the problem. I guess finally...
Not part of the problem, the problem.
The problem. Yeah, the big problem.
Yeah.
And social media, we are in a digital world, and I suppose as you express concerns heading into next year, is that this just prepares that and is that rife ground for whether it's hate speech, you name it. And you talked about the cyber laws. I wonder whether for you how that terrain then is navigated, or will this just really blow out of proportion this problem we're speaking about?
Yeah, I would like to plead with both Parliament and the judiciary to strongly think about the issue of social media and how best we can regulate them. The problem again takes us to how honest. For example, the judiciary might feel the executive will exploit this to the disadvantage of everybody else.
Right.
While the executive might feel the judiciary is playing games here and making the executive ineffective.
Yeah.
In essence, I think by refusing to allow this piece of legislation that would regulate social media, it is in a way making us ineffective. And that's why it has been very difficult, because a lot of people now understand if I go to the social media and I use that, it's a bit difficult to prosecute it, because we really don't have the legislation to deal with that effectively. So it is important that these institutions sit together and allow us, as for example, as ODPP and also the executive, to be effective, to be able to discharge a mandate. Over too much oversight also makes the government processes very difficult. So, for example, there's a lot of administrative reviews you cannot do, even for prosecutions. For example, we cannot prosecute because somebody can run to court and say, we want to put a stop order. Stop orders remain in effect for years. You cannot prosecute, you become ineffective. And in the end, this has a ripple effect that the public and the criminals will feel, there's a way for us to exploit. There's nothing much these people can do.
Right.
We will go, we will pay the bail, we'll be out again. I've paid 500,000. What is 500,000 for a politician who's probably making millions? He can be able to forfeit that and continue with the crime.
Yeah.
So really, we really need to interrogate a lot of things. That's why I told you, if we were to talk about this, it will take, and I'm sure if the judiciary comes here, they will give you the other side of the story. If Parliament was to come here, the same thing. But the fact that these three arms are trying to outdo each other, especially between the judiciary now and Parliament, and also us. I mean, it does have that ripple effect where things become ineffective.
You're not moving.
And there is no deterrence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. As we go, I said lastly, but on a scale of 1 to 10, just to understand where you gauge how we're doing going into 2022, 10 being very worried of electoral violence around political intolerance, 1 being not worried. Where do you stand?
I can't say I'm not worried.
And that worried stands at between 1 and 10, where 10 is very?
I think between 6 and 7 for
6
now.
and 7, yeah.
And as we go.
Well, the Director of Public Prosecution, DPP Haji, speaking to my colleague Sophia Wanuna earlier, we're putting all that to perspective because for a prosecution to get a conviction, there must be adequate investigations. That's why it's important to know what exactly is happening. NCIC is here, the religious sector is also here, and we're going to be speaking to them, and they will be telling us exactly where the problem lies, because for us to find a solution in this country, all stakeholders have to be brought on the table. That's why they're here tonight. We'll be speaking to them now until 9 and also 10 to 11. Sophia.
Indeed, thank you, Ken. The DPP there had quite a lot to say. We'll be discussing that, as Ken has mentioned, and we'll get to hear from our guests who I will be introducing when we return from this short break. Please stay with us.